All right. I think we're live. Mic check 1 2 1 2. Mic check 1 2 1 2. If anyone in the chat can hear me, just push 1. All right, got a confirmation. Thank you for the confirmation. Welcome back to the Black Brain Trust. This is episode 445. Geopolitics. Please hit the like button as you come in. Share the video if possible. Hit that notification bell so you get all the updates from the Black Brain Trust, including those posted on the community tab. Docket and description beneath the video for you to follow along with. If you want to engage in the discussion, there'll be a link in the chat. When you click on the link, make sure you raise your hand so that one of us can acknowledge you and advance you to the panel. All right, let me get the link. Make a shout out to people who arrived before I did. Salute to Excalibur. What's going on? David Monroe. King, what's going on? Ghana Warrior, what's up? The Breakdown, how are you doing? Good evening to you. Interesting stream you just had. Black Scorpion, what's going on? Women of the Past, good evening to you. Shalom, JD. Earl Owens, hello. All right. Let me get started. Why is that in the I don't know why that's in there. Let me update the docket because there's a few items in there that should not be there. It's interesting. All right, let me get started real quick. First item on the docket is from Asia Times. This was sent by Amanda tomorrow. UK can use Huawei 5G despite security fears, says Prime Minister. Britain has been using Huawei technology in its systems for the past 15 years. The cheeky bastards. All right. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson on Monday insisted the UK can have technological progress while preserving national security as he prepared to approve a role for Chinese telecom giant Huawei in developing its 5G telecoms network despite strong U.S. opposition. Johnson spoke after U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo on Sunday tweeted the UK has a momentous decision ahead on 5G. The United States has banned Huawei from the rollout of its next generation 5G mobile networks because of concerns, strongly denied that the firm could be under control of Beijing. With Washington heaping pressure on Johnson to sideline Huawei totally, the Financial Times reported that Britain was Tuesday expected to approve a restricted role for the group. It comes after a senior UK official last week strongly hinted at a green light for Huawei. Speaking to reporters Monday, Johnson said, "There's no reason why we shouldn't have technological progress here in the UK. Allow consumers, businesses in the UK to have access to fantastic technology, fantastic communications, but also protect our security interests and protect our key partnerships with other security powers around the world." The Financial Times said that amid U.S. opposition, UK ministers were looking to impose a cap on Huawei's market share in the project. There has, meanwhile, been widespread speculation that Britain would allow Huawei into non-core elements of 5G networks, such as antennae and base stations attached to masts and roofs. Washington has threatened to limit intelligence sharing with London should the UK proceed. There are suggestions also that a possible harming of relations between the two allies over Huawei could affect Britain's chances of securing a favorable U.S. trade deal following Brexit. Britain, which departs the European Union on Friday, has for some time moved to downplay U.S. security fears. The UK official pointed out that unlike the United States, Britain has been using Huawei technology in its systems for the past 15 years. UK security agencies believe they have managed to risk so far and will be able to do so with the 5G network. The 5G technology offers almost instantaneous data transfer and is seen as a key for technology such as self-driving cars and remotely operated factory robots. So I find this, and thanks to Man of Tomorrow for sending this. This is interesting because what's happening here is that they're willing to risk relations with the United States based on this one deal. The United States is threatening them. So before they were threatening, they were threatening not South Korea. They were threatening the European Union for doing business with China, and said that there would be consequences. And they also punished the European Union for trying to do business with Iran. Now it's their closest ally, which is the UK. They're saying, well, if you think you're going to do business with China from a technological standpoint without our blessing, you pretty much can kiss your intelligence gathering and sharing with us, out goodbye and out the window, right? So what I'm saying here is that overall, the UK is moving in a different direction. You saw the same thing with Brexit. Brexit was the first step. Now, the next step is to redeploy the Commonwealth. We talked about this last week on Geopolitics, that the United Kingdom is looking to reestablish the Commonwealth. The third step will be to establish better relations with the former colonialist or colonized people of Africa, Caribbean, and even as far as Australia. And so because of that, you may see, the next World War, the United States may be by themselves. You may see Canada flip too. The Canadians may say, hey, we're right next to you, about a half hour away, but we really don't have a whole lot of shared interests here. Mexico, same thing. Mexico is the juggernaut in Latin America now from an economic standpoint. The rest of Latin America is still, give me 1 second. The rest of Latin America is still playing catch up with the rest of the West. And so what's going on here is that everybody's going their own way. Everybody, has their own SYS, XXX, right? Save yourself, nation state. The United States may find itself alone. Interesting, we just got 2 thumbs down. All right, let me skip right next to the next article. This one is from the Asia Times. Duterte looks to boot U.S. troops from Philippines. Expand this out. Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte has renewed a long-standing threat to sever security cooperation with the United States and angry response to recent travel bans imposed on Filipino officials involved in alleged rights abuses. The firebrand Filipino leader has also reportedly turned down U.S. President Donald Trump's invitation to attend a special U.S. Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, summit meeting to be held in Las Vegas later this year. If Duterte follows through on his threat, it would mark a significant diplomatic and strategic departure for the longtime mutual defense treaty allies and give China a new advantage in the contested South China Sea. As the U.S. and other Western nations ramp up sanctions against perpetrators of human rights violations in the Philippines, including those behind a lethal drug war, Duterte seems increasingly worried about his and his allies' prospects as he enters the twilight of his 6-year tenure. By dangling America's future access to strategic Philippine bases, crucial outposts in the contest for influence in the South China Sea, the Filipino leader likely hopes to deter any escalation of targeted Western sanctions against his inner circle and potentially himself in the months and years ahead. At the same time, he has doubled down on his strategic pivot to Russia and China, which, according to the Filipino president, respect the sovereignty of the Philippines, something that he says has been totally lacking by America and the West. Since his ascent to the presidency, Duterte has been at loggerheads with the U.S. and Western partners over human rights concerns. His scorched earth drug war, which has reportedly claimed the lives of thousands of drug suspects, has soured relations with traditional allies. The Trump administration initially sought to de-emphasize disagreements in favor of tighter strategic cooperation, especially in light of shared concerns over China's assertiveness in the South China Sea. But tensions came to a head last year when a bipartisan effort to punish human rights violators in the Philippines was approved by the U.S. government. In recent days, a number of top Philippine officials have openly expressed their concerns over facing travel bans and other punitive measures for their alleged involvement in alleged abuses. The most prominent among is Senator Bato de la Rosa, a former Philippine National Police chief who oversaw the most brutal phase of Duterte's drug war. I was told to just apply again if I want. because the president visa was canceled. De La Rosa, who is now a senator, confirmed on January 22nd when asked about reports his diplomatic visa was revoked. Shortly thereafter, Duterte upped the diplomatic ante by threatening in retaliation to abrogate the Philippine-U.S. Visiting Forces Agreement, VFA. The VFA, negotiated soon after the closure of American military bases in the Philippines in the early 1990s, provides the legal framework for U.S. soldiers to enter the Philippines. It also provides the operating software for the Philippine-U.S. Defense Alliance enshrined in the 1951 Mutual Defense Treaty, which at any given time sees U.S. troops stationed in the country on a rotating basis, including in terrorism-prone southern regions. Now they won't let Bato go to America. I am warning you if you don't do the correction there. 1, I will terminate the base's visiting forces agreement. I will end that son of a bitch, Duterte thundered in remarks reported in local media. Without the VFA, the U.S. would not be able to sustain its significant military presence in the Philippines, a turn that would have major ramifications for America's strategic position in the Western Pacific, particularly vis-a-vis China. It would also impact on joint military activities and exercises, on which nearly 300 were held last year. Ratified by the Philippine Senate in the late 1990s, some suggest that the upper house would have to approve Duterte's scrapping of the VFA. However, top government officials maintain that Duterte can unilaterally abrogate the agreement without legislative approval. The termination of the VFA may be unilaterally initiated by the Philippines, and it is well within the right of the Philippine government to do so if it determines that the agreement no longer redounds to our national interests. Philippine Defense Secretary Delfin Lorenzana told reporters on January 24th. All that is required is that a notice of termination to be served to the U.S. government. The termination shall take effect 180 days after the date of the notice. The defense secretary, known for his independent views of long-standing ties with the U.S., placed Duterte's latest threat within the broader context of perceived persistent U.S. interference in Philippine domestic affairs. I can understand why Duterte is peeved by the cancellation of Senator Bato's visa because of alleged extrajudicial killings in connection with the drug war. Lorenzana told the writer on January 24th. It is a direct affront to Duterte being the architect of the drug war that he started upon his assumption of office. Let's not forget, Duterte ordered Bato, then the newly installed PNP chief, to launch the drug war and enjoined the entire PNP to do their duties and pledge he would back them up, that he would take responsibility for their official actions. Lorenzana said that he would go to prison for them. He is just being true to his promise, the defense chief added. The reaction among Filipino senators, however, has been mixed. Key Duterte allies, such as Senator Aquilino Pimentel, who chairs the Upper House Foreign Relations Committee, said that the president can nix the VFA with or without a reason. That agreement should always be subject to review. He can't even say that times have changed and it is no longer needed by the country, he added. More independent-leaning senators such as Panfilo have referred to Duterte's threat as unfortunate and unnecessary, since the VFA is a bilateral agreement between the Philippines and the U.S. that went through some careful and diplomatic discussion, he wrote on Twitter. Civil society groups have been equally critical. Even progressive leaders such as Renato Reyes of the left-leaning Bogang Bayan Party, a longtime critic of America's military presence in the Philippines, warned against trivialization of the matter for personal reasons. Determination of the VFA is a serious matter. We have fought for it since 1999. It is not a mere bargaining chip to get Bato back his visa, U.S. visa, Ray said. Determination of the VFA is needed because it is an affront to our national sovereignty. Don't trivialize this issue. What is going on with this? Duterte's threat could thus be seen as a calculated maneuver to deter further sanctions against the inner circle, including against his longtime assistant and current senator, Bongo, if not himself, after his single term expires in 2022. The Filipino president has sought to portray his latest threat to abrogate the VFA as both a nationalistic assertion of sovereignty and a diplomatic bid to prevent regional conflict, namely between the US and China. So what's happening here is that Duterte is actually a very much an alpha male in his right. Yeah, Duterte is very much an alpha male in his right. And what's happening here is you have somebody like Trump who's very much who be considered a political alpha, and you have somebody like Duterte who in his own right is a nationalist alpha in his own right. There really isn't all that much gain that he can get from the United States anymore if they start imposing travel bans on him. So what other recourse would he have? Well, he doesn't have a whole lot to bargain with, because the Philippines doesn't make a whole lot of things that the United States really needs. In fact, their trade is not all that great to begin with. I think they do more trade with China than they do with the United States. And so military to military agreements is one thing, but what happens when it comes to commercial trade? The Philippines is actually losing out more by making these sacrifices, to deal with the West. The Canadians are actually shipping their trash, what's considered to be recyclable trash, to the Philippines to dispose of. And the Philippines, under Duterte, he's saying, well, we don't really need all of this trash to do anything. We can't do anything with it. So why should we take on the trash? And he has rerouted those trash barges back to Canada and said, you need to take your stuff back. So he's cutting ties with just about everybody. I personally think it would do him due diligence to actually have a summit with Mexico, because Mexico and the Philippines both have a shared history of colonization. They were both colonized by the same people. And so it would behoove President Duterte to actually go to Mexico and actually have a conversation with them on country-to-country relations, because that would send a message to the United States that you're not the only player in town that I can do business with in the West, And plus, if you look at Filipinos such as Duterte and look at some of the indigenous people in Mexico, you see that there are very stark phenotypical similarities between the two. So there's a shared culture there that has not really been put together, that can actually be established. If you really think about the language, there may be some similarities in dialect in some of these areas, some of the vocabulary, but what I'm saying is overall, it will behoove Duterte to stop making these moves now before he gets tossed out of the, before he gets tossed out of office. But the United States is going to lose out big time on this. Who is the United States to actually criticize anybody for, a drug war? They themselves have created the whole entire drug war in the United States and in the West. Who are they to talk about it? What the Philippine government does, or what the Mexican government does, or what the African governments do, or what the Iranians do in terms of how they deal with drug dealers and whatnot. Everybody else deals with drug dealers the same exact way. They execute them. In Iran, you get caught selling drugs, you get executed. In the Philippines, it's the same thing. In Mexico, it's the same thing. The Mexican government is basically used their military to wage war against the cartels. I don't see any difference. The United States government did the same exact thing in the 70s and 80s. And even into the 90s, they were doing the same exact thing. So who are they to criticize, All right, let me move on to the next article. All right. All right. Next item on the docket is from the heritage.org, the Heritage Foundation. India and the Philippines, a new chapter in defense ties. So the Philippines swaps one superpower for another superpower. Yeah, DE Raptor, you're right about that. Saudi Arabia. I forgot to mention that. All right, I'm not going to read this whole thing. I'm just going to read next 5 minutes of this. Despite the stark differences in size and population, on paper, India and the Philippines would appear to make natural partners. They are both noisy Indo-Pacific democracies currently ruled by controversial but popular leaders. The Philippines is a treaty ally of the United States, while India is one of America's closest strategic partners. Manila and Delhi are both engaged in active territorial disputes with Beijing, and both are mostly invested in the rules-based order. In practice, however, strategic interactions between Delhi and Manila have traditionally been quite shallow. That's true of many of India's relationships in the East and Southeast Asia, though it's gradually changing under a reinvigorated Act East policy launched by Prime Minister Narendra Modi in 2014. In recent years, Delhi has strengthened ties with traditional partners like Japan, Vietnam, and Singapore, while conducting new forms of outreach to Indonesia, South Korea, and Australia. Is India looking to add the Philippines to the list? In 2019, there were two signals that suggest it might. First, from May 2nd to the 8th, 2019, the navies of the Philippines and India joined those from the United States and Japan in a quadrilateral joint sail through the contested South China Sea. India dispatched a destroyer and tanker for the exercise, while the Philippines sent a patrol vessel. The ships transiting from South Korea to Singapore engaged in formation exercises, communication drills, passenger transfers, and a leadership exchange. The exercise overlapped with a U.S. freedom of navigation operation in the South China Sea, challenging illegal Chinese claims there. While it was a low-level exercise from a technical standpoint, India's participation carried geopolitical significance. Delhi has traditionally been reticent to join multi-participant naval exercises that could be interpreted as provocative towards China, particularly in contested seas. Second, in December 2019, Filipino Defense Secretary Delfin Lorenzana, we just talked about him in the last article, announced that the Philippines was interested in purchasing from India 2 batteries of BrahMos missiles, an advanced cruise missile co-developed by India and Russia defense firms. Lorenzana suggested a contract would be forthcoming in 2020, so we're talking about this year, possibly on the first or second quarter, saying the missiles would be the first Philippine weaponry with deterrent capabilities. It would also mark the BrahMos export deal for the Indian, the first BrahMos export deal for the Indian government, which has been unsuccessful in courting buyers despite a decade of on again, off again talks with Vietnam. I contributed to a study published earlier this year by the RAND Corporation, the thickening web of Asian security cooperation, deepening defense ties among U.S. allies and partners in the Indo-Pacific. It examined India's defense and strategic ties with several East and Southeast Asian partners, including Japan, Australia, Philippines, Vietnam, Singapore, South Korea, and Indonesia. One of the early takeaways, India's ties with the Philippines were among the least developed in the region. Indeed, India has formed strategic partnerships of varying character with all capitals in the study. The Philippines was the only exception. Despite establishing diplomatic relations in November 1949 and signing a treaty of friendship in July 1952, relations between India and the Philippines were insubstantial through much of the 20th century, as my co-author Greg Pauling wrote in the RAND study. India has historically not played much a role in Philippine strategic thinking, foreign policy, economics, or security cooperation. Elsewhere in the Southeast Asia, religious and cultural linkages shared British colonial legacies, and a large Indian diaspora helped maintain ties to the subcontinent throughout the 20th century, even as New Delhi lacked an effective diplomatic or economic presence in the region. But none of those are major factors in Philippine society. The pace of high-level political and defense exchanges did begin to increase in the 1990s following the launch of India's Look East policy, with head of state exchanges in 1991, 1997, 2006, and 2007. Leaders from both countries are periodically met on the sidelines of major regional gatherings, including in 2007, 2012, 2014. During a 2006 meeting between the two countries, presidents they signed a memorandum of understanding, MOU, on defense and security operation and established several high-level commissions and dialogues. By the mid-2010s, the two had established a joint commission on bilateral cooperation, a joint committee on defense cooperation, a new foreign policy consultations and security dialogue, and a joint working group on counterterrorism. At a meeting of the Joint Defense Committee in March 2017, the two discussed significant regional security concerns, including tensions in South China Sea and Indian Ocean piracy. India and the Philippines have also begun holding regular intelligence exchange meetings on a range of sensitive issues. India trains Filipino foreign service officers at its Foreign Service Institute, and the two have begun conducting military training exchanges, including India hosting a 34-member Filipino military delegation for a week-long training course in 2016. The first exchange among their respective national defense colleges was conducted in India in 2013, and a delegation from the Indian College of Defense Management visited the Philippines the same year. Indian warships have also become frequent visitors to the Philippines on their regular deployments to the South China Sea. In November 2017, the two countries witnessed a breakthrough when Modi became the first Indian leader to visit the Philippines in 36 years. In Manila, Modi attended the ASEAN and East Asian summits and met with President Rodrigo Duterte, where the two signed an agreement to boost cooperation in defense and logistics. 2 months later, Duterte was welcomed in Delhi for Republic Day celebrations, along with the leaders of other ASEAN member states. The Filipino Defense Secretary traveled to Delhi in March 2018, and the Philippines participated in India's annual Defense Expo for the following month. Despite this progress and expressed interest from both sides, the two have found little success to date in boosting cooperation in defense sales or co-production. This is at least partly a product of the Philippines' underdeveloped military capabilities, among the weakest in the region. Notably, in 2015, an Indian firm bid on a $400 million contract to provide 2 light frigates for the Philippine Navy. India's state-owned Calcutta-based Garden Research Shipbuilders and Engineers, GRSC, reportedly submitted the most competitive bid, but failed to meet financial requirements in the post-qualification assessments by the Philippine Navy. Specifically, the Philippine Navy insisted on paying in full on delivery of warships and assessed GRSE did not have adequate funds available to construct the vessels without supporting payments. India's defense ministry requested diplomatic intervention, but the deal failed to materialize. Once the second only to Vietnam in raising alarm about Chinese activities in the South China Sea, Manila has assumed a much more submissive demeanor toward Beijing since firebrand Rodrigo Duterte was elected president in 2016. Prior to the Duterte's victory, India appeared to be drifting closer to the Philippines. In 2015, Indian External Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj made an unusual reference to the South China Sea as the West Philippine Sea in a joint statement with her Filipino counterpart. A year later, India supported an unclose arbitral tribunal ruling that found in favor of the Philippines and invalidated many of China's claims in the South China Sea. However, Duterte's high-profile charm offensive toward Beijing, which included largely abandoning the tribunal award, may have limited the room for strategic convergence with India on broader geopolitical questions. Duterte, who has casually joked about raping women and called each of President Obama the Pope and the God son of a bitch on different occasions, has openly courted Chinese President Xi Jinping since assuming office. In February 2019, Duterte explained that Xi was a man of honor while quipping the Philippines was already a province of China. The nearest is Fujian. Notably, Duterte's make sure this is okay. Notably, Duterte's more benevolent views of Beijing are not shared by the Filipino public or military establishment. In a January 2019 Post-Asia survey, 84% of Filipinos surveyed expressed trust in the United States. Only 39% felt China was trustworthy. In a December 2019 Pew survey, 64% felt the United States could be relied upon as a dependable ally. Only 9% said the same for China, while 62% saw it as the greatest threat to their country. Nor has Duterte's courtship of China delivered the benefits he anticipated. When the Filipino president visited Beijing in 2016, he signed 27 deals with Xi, including $24 billion in pledged Chinese investments. An assessment 2 years later found barely any projects have materialized, prompting deep concerns that President Rodrigo Duterte has undermined the country's sovereignty with little to show in return. By one count, during Duterte's first year in office, U.S. and Japanese investments in the Philippines dwarfed those of China. Meanwhile, provocative Chinese maritime activities in the Philippines maritime space have only increased, as one Filipino analyst summarized. China now patrols Philippine seas and airspace. Its Coast Guard controls entry into the vicinity of Scarborough Shoal, 120 miles off Luzon. Paramilitary fleets increasingly are fishing in the Philippines 200-mile exclusive economic zone, EEZ. Warships venture close to Zambos and Mindoro in the West Philippine Sea. Chinese aircraft regularly confront Philippine flights to Pagasa Island and Palawan's Kalawan Island group. Maritime research vessels are exploring the Philippine western seabed as well as Benam rise off Cagayan, and Samar and Surigao in the east. All of these are in breach of international law. Yeah, when you don't have a navy, you can't really do much, which is something that they should have worked on. And you don't need a whole massive military. I mean, we saw what happened in the conflict between Argentina and the British over the Falkland Islands. They did not have a really massive military, but they had a whole lot of might. And so the ability to actually land a heavy punch against a bigger military power, a superpower on top of that, was actually pretty critical. And I think that the Philippines can actually learn from Singapore, or even past records of some other military conflicts, that they can defend themselves if they plan this out strategically. You don't need big, massive aircraft carriers and fifth generation fighter jets. You can get by just fine with fourth generation fighter jets and fifth generation electronics. You can get by just fine with supersonic missiles that are strategically placed in coastal batteries and so on and so forth. There's a lot of ways that they can actually go about defending themselves against what they feel may be an approach in China, if they're doing everything that they say that they're doing in this article, and that linking themselves up with India, who's a technological superpower within their own right. They have some of the best human resources when it comes to information technology. You would think that the Philippines would actually work closely with India to adopt some of the same ideas, because they have a considerable amount of human resources per capita, if you really want to look at it. We got Nagon 11 on the panel. What's going on?
Oh, what's going on, Mike?
What's up, man?
All right, man. All right. Just listening here for a second.
All right, man.
Give me 1 minute.
Right. Yeah, and so what can the Philippines do? We know from the last article that they want to get rid of the United States. We know that they do not have a strong relationship with Canada, so that's out of the deal for them. But they do have a strong relationship with Russia. Putin said in 2016 to Rodrigo Duterte, President Duterte, that you can have anything you want, including nuclear arms. This is coming out of Duterte's mouth. He said this himself on YouTube. You can have ships, you can have missiles, surface-to-air missiles, you can have anything you want. Now, if I was Duterte, if I was advising Duterte, I would say, talk to the Russians, get that S-400 inside the Philippines immediately. Put multiple batteries up and down your islands, north, south, east and the west flanks of your country. That's one area of cooperation you can make. You don't need a whole lot of tanks, because trust me, there will be no landing, a whole landing brigade coming into your country at any point if you get into a conflict with China or somebody else for that matter, or a NATO power for that matter, because that's probably going to be your biggest threat is China and NATO. China will pretty much walk in, and if your military is not up to snuff, they'll walk in and it'll be a field day for them. The other half would be NATO. If there is a conflict, NATO may come and assert themselves. We don't know. But it would be in your best interest to get the S-400 missile system in place. It would be in your best interest to have coastal battery systems with the KH-35. It would be in your best interest to have very fast attack boats like the Iranians have. The Iranians have used that effectively. 100 attack craft with about 20 or so Katyusha or even more high impact missiles on them that will attack a warship in an asymmetric format. They can bring it down. We know, we covered an article last week that talked about U.S. military high-ranking official who did the tabletop exercise about the United States getting into a conflict with Iran. It said that all simulations point to the United States actually losing that a conflict. So you have to have the willpower of your people backed by asymmetric warfare that's going to actually play out well in your favor. That would actually deter somebody like China coming in. So if they think that they need to go buy big aircraft carriers and fifth generation F-35 fighter jets, you really don't need that. A Sukhoi 34 would work just fine. You know, not drone technology. Submarine warfare, underwater warfare, that's going to play out in your favor. There's a lot of ways that they can go about this. And if they look at Singapore's military defense, you see that there's very few people who will come into to Singapore to try to take it over, despite the size of Singapore. It's probably about the size of New Jersey, but you would be hard pressed to go in there and try to take it from them. It'd be like trying to put your hand on a porcupine. Won't be a happy ending. So all right, that's that. Let me go on to the next article. Let's stay with the South China Sea. Let's do that. We got Wesley on the panel. What's going on, Wesley?
What's good?
Chilling, man, chilling. You have anything you want to contribute from what you've heard so far?
Yeah. I just joined, so
okay.
I'm a bit late to the party.
All right. Next item on the docket is from Al Jazeera. The chaos coronavirus exposes China's healthcare weakness. Who knew that their their healthcare system was so weak? On January 20th, Fu Bin's father started coughing and running a fever. As residents of Wuhan, they knew about a deadly new coronavirus that had originated in the central Chinese city weeks ago, but decided to stay home and hope these symptoms would subside. 4 days later, when his father's body temperature soared to 40 degrees, I'm assuming they're talking about Celsius, Fu Bin rushed him to the hospital. Together, they headed to the Wuhan Union Hospital, but at reception, they were turned away. They were told they had to go to one of 7 hospitals the government had designated for fever patients. The 2 men went to Wuhan Red Cross Hospital, one of the designated facilities, and found the line of people waiting to get checked was so long they would have to wait outside potentially for hours in the cold and rain. They decided to try their luck elsewhere. The second and third hospital were both packed. It took Fu Bin 2 days to get his father admitted to Wuhan No. 5 hospital, and he is one of the lucky ones. As thousands, if not tens of thousands, of fever patients who fear they might have caught the novel coronavirus that has now killed more than 100 people rushed to Wuhan's hospitals. The outbreak is testing China's healthcare system on a scale not seen since the country was hit by severe acute respiratory syndrome, or SARS, 17 years ago. The response from the government has been utter chaos, said a nurse who works in Wuhan and preferred not to disclose her name. The current healthcare system was completely unready for a situation like this. The nurse works at one of the designated hospitals treating victims of a virus that has already affected nearly 10,000 people. You would think the government and hospitals had learned something from the SARS outbreak and prepared ourselves for another emergency like this, she said angrily over the phone. But no, they learned nothing. Interesting. First line of defense. There have been urgent appeals for medical supplies, not only in Wuhan and the province of Hubei, but beyond. The government has blamed the Lunar New Year holiday, when factories traditionally close, for the shortages of masks and goggles and other crucial supplies, saying it's hard to step up manufacturing during the festive season. Shortly after the SARS epidemic, the Chinese government established and updated several times a medical materials reserve system that was supposed to ensure sufficient supplies in the event of any public health emergency. However, reports filed with the Chinese Center for Disease and Control and Prevention suggest reserves at some hospitals have not been maintained. In 2019, article detailing Guang's province's emergency medical supplies reserve, provincial CDC said that of the 11 items needed for the in the event of public health emergency, only 5 items were fully stocked at the local level. There are priorities in our expenditure budget, and none of us could have expected an emergency like this. An officer from Sichuan's provincial CDC told Al Jazeera on the condition of anonymity. So I believe sometimes the supplies reserve might not be ideal. For ordinary patients like Fubin, it is not just the lack of medical supplies. In China, a lack of properly trained general practitioners means the first line of defense does not exist. There is lack of trust in clinics and general practitioners or general physicians, who are often difficult to find, and people prefer to go straight to hospital as soon as they need medical care. In Wuhan, the capital of Hubei province, that meant a flood of patients in the initial days of outbreak as people lined up in front of hospitals hoping to get treatment. Health inequality. The majority of people rush to a limited number of well-known hospitals, also known as a grade 3 level A hospitals, the highest category determined by the Ministry of Health. Grade 3 level A hospitals have attracted the most qualified medical staff and modern equipment, and the well-known concentration of resources has put immense pressure on these hospitals. Of course, I'd only go to grade 3 level A, Rubin said. I doubt other hospitals have doctors good enough to treat diseases properly. Many experts have said that a sudden rush to these medical facilities might have contributed to the widespread cross-infection. Authorities are now building 2 more temporary hospitals to accommodate the expected thousands of cases. We understand that a lot of patients are choosing 2 top hospitals over others, the municipal party secretary of Wuhan said during a news conference. But we're trying to change the mentality now so more people could get treated. But that does not address a larger problem, the unequal distribution of medical resources across China. The level of medical care available in an area almost directly correlates with a province level of development. In Hubei province, 44 of the 88 grade 3 level A hospitals are located in Wuhan, home to 11 million of the province's more than 50 million people. In China overall, most of the best hospitals are found in more developed, wealthier eastern coastal cities. Such inequality also extends to provision of medical staff in different locations. In Beijing, the capital and home to approximately 20 million people, there are 100,000 registered doctors, whereas in Sichuan, a western province of more than 80 million people, there are 200,000 according to the National Bureau of Statistics. That means there are 4.63 doctors per 1,000 people in the capital. There are only 2.46 per 1,000 in Sichuan. This is interesting because you would think that China would be well prepared for something like this. And they got caught with their pants down on this one. I suspected that there was some kind of biological warfare going on between them and Western powers. And I could be wrong on it. I don't know all the details behind this because I'm not involved in medicine or any sort of healthcare science. And so I was under the impression that China would have this licked, right? They would have urgent care facilities and whatnot. But when you really think about urgent care facilities in the United States, that came out of the civil rights movement under the Black Panther Party. And so Black people were thinking about this long, 34, 45, 50, 60 years ago. They were thinking long about this, of how to treat their people if in the case of an emergency that they can't get to a hospital. And you would think that a superpower like China would actually figure this out, but that turns out not to be the case. So they have a chink in their armor that biological warfare could actually wreak havoc on their country. You may not even have to fire a shot at them. Wes, you have anything you want to add to this?
Well, I would say I don't think it's a biological. I don't think it was some actor that was using biological agents, because like if biological weapons, like if you use them on your target, you can't control them. You can't control the spread of it. So you're just hurting yourself in the process of hurting your enemy. That's just my opinion.
Okay. Nicole 11, you have anything on that? I think Nicole is gone, so we move on to the next item on the docket. All right. Next item on the docket is from the Wall Street Journal. How Putin outfoxed Trump in Venezuela. The Trump administration underestimated how much support President Nicolas Maduro will receive from Russia and Cuba, as well as from U.S. allies. This is behind the paywall. The Trump administration's bid to replace Venezuela's authoritarian leader, Nicolas Maduro, hit a roadblock after a meeting with Russian officials in Rome last year and has never recovered. U.S. envoy Elliot Abrams arrived at the Westin Excelsior hotel, hoping to persuade Russia to withdraw its support for Mr. Maduro and to recognize Juan Guaido as Venezuela's legitimate leader. Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Rybakov instead demanded the U.S. back down from military threats and lift economic sanctions intended to stifle the government. So, just behind the paywall. For those of you who don't know, Elliot Abrams, he's an old character. I'll go over him in a few seconds because he's another clown of neocons that's in the White House now. There's no way that this moron right here, this suckerlade right here, there's no way that this guy can run the country. The majority of the people do not support him. He has very little support. I think he has less than 10% of support. And at this point right now, the last polling says that he has even less than 10%. So this guy is not all that favored. And he's a millennial on top of that. Not that there's anything against millennials, but he's not to be taken seriously by people of Venezuela because he doesn't have any credibility on the ground. He has more invested in the United States than he does, in Venezuela. I mean, yeah, he speaks Spanish, but at the same time, he's not this credible person. He's no, he's no leader. He's no alpha male. He's a clown. if you look at his old YouTube videos, man, he mooned a couple of cameras, man. I'm kind of wondering, man, he's a little cream puff there. He's a political cream puff, man. He's running around trying to find options, but at the same time, you don't have support from anybody. Who would support you? And so Maduro, and although this article from the Wall Street Journal is saying that Maduro is is this sort of dictator, have they looked at U.S. allies in the Middle East? What about Saudi Arabia? When's the last time that there was a democratic election in Saudi Arabia? You see, the problem with the Western point of view is that it's always based on a very repugnant, racist sort of perspective. That socialism is bad if it's black and brown people, but it's good if it's European. Dictatorships are bad if it's black and brown people, or authoritarian governments are considered to be bad if it's black and brown people, but if it's Arabs, then it's just fine, right? Monarchies are bad if it has anything to do with the continent, but if it's the King of Spain or the British Crown, they're perfectly fine with that. And so that sort of racist point of view doesn't really work anymore, because we live in a globalized society. We have the internet, we have social media, we have alternative news and things of that nature, and that we can actually look at things from a three-dimensional standpoint. Before, you could have told somebody this in the 1980s and they would have believed that that communism was going to come and eat these people alive in the West, and that there would be T-55 tanks crossing crossing the Canadian border from Alaska or something like that, from the the eastern part of Russia or the Soviet Union at the time. And so you can spin that narrative 30 years ago, but today you can't do that. And so this guy doesn't get any support because he's suckling, and people on the ground know that.
Hey, Mike.
Yes, sir.
Did you guys cover Putin's State of the Union address?
I think we kind of lightly touched on it last week, but not.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, the New York Times and pretty much all the mainstream media, the way they were classifying it was that Vladimir Putin was becoming more authoritarian. He was going to take on more and more power. Mm-hmm. But the reality of the story was he was actually just strengthening the other institutions from other than the presidency.
Mm-hmm.
It's like America's pretty authoritarian.
Yeah.
If you look at it from a policy perspective, it's if you look at the polls, Medicare for All polls 60-70%, mm-hmm. But if you look at the policy, it's totally against that. It's kind of ridiculous.
Yeah, but if you let them tell the story, they'll tell you that if you let them tell the story, that there were no Native Americans here, and that slavery never happened. It was indentured servitude, and that Europeans are actually indigenous to the North American continent. They'll have you believe that, and they're actually trying to rewrite the history right now in Texas with their public education system by trying to write slavery out of the books, and they're actually trying to make it seem as if the Confederates were the heroes.
That's the end game for the Israelis as well. They want to make it look like, the Palestinians, they were just like the Native Americans.
Yep. Right.
They just existed.
Absolutely crazy. Absolutely crazy they can get away with something like that. And it's hard to do that. Go ahead.
I just, at the same time, we kind of benefit from the system. So I'm not praying for its downfall.
How much do you think that Black people really benefit from the system?
Well, from my personal perspective. So let me ask you a question. How, when it comes to policy shaping, like, are you an individualist or are you more collectivist?
I'm a collectivist.
Collectivist. Are you ADOS?
I'm not. Family's from Barbados.
Barbados.
See, I would agree with you that, you know, Black people benefit from the system, but the system functions without Black people, if that makes any sense, right? It's not like Black people contribute to the technological and political body of the system. They really don't. They actually don't benefit from it. If you think about the drug policies and the drug war on Black people and how welfare, you know, Title IX and Title 10, they really never benefited from it. They kind of just exist within the system itself, but they don't actually have any sort of
direct control.
They don't have any influence on the system itself. It's not like, well, you know, Black people just march down to Washington. You know, there are no Black politicians that have the best interests of Black people, right? And then there is no Black Silicon Valley. I mean, Atlanta was supposed to be that, but at this point, that's almost null and void. And so we don't really contribute to any fourth industrialized and influence within the country itself. You know, you go through Black neighborhoods and you see a lot of dilapidation and stuff like that, and a lot of neglect from not just from the people, but from the government itself. The government doesn't even acknowledge it. You go to Baltimore, you see last year kids in classrooms freezing because there was no heat inside the public school system. Absurd. That doesn't even happen in other countries like that. And you think about the amount of the lack of home ownership because of redlining and other policies. Black people just kind of exist within the system in this country. You know, they don't really have a whole lot that they can really hold on to other than their hourly wage jobs. They don't really control all that much. And my perspective has always been, instead of trying to vote for the Democratic Party, they should have been constructing their own party and constructing, you know, their own sort of narrative, because the Congressional Black Caucus, as bodacious as it makes itself out to be, doesn't really seem to address a lot of the poverty issues that happens in places like Detroit and Chicago and Baltimore and Mississippi and those places. So, you know, it's almost like a joke. David Monroe asked a question. He says, "What system is better for the poor?" You would need something like a shared economics platform. You would need something very a socialist capitalist sort of system. It's a very much hybrid system. One where you share a lot of resources, but you also capitalize off of your ventures. But the problem
cooperative business. That's what we need. It's old. It's been practiced for thousands of years. That's what kept people out of having a lot of poverty across the board. Literally a shared cooperative business where people all have an interest in. That's how you handle a lot of this. But people don't want to deal with that. But
no,
I wanted to say that.
Yeah, because everybody, you're right about that. And that's because everybody wants to claim to be a capitalist. You go around the manosphere, everybody's claiming, I'm a capitalist. And they can't even tell you the difference between capitalism and socialism and these other isms, right? They're all about the business until it's actually time to do business.
Yeah. You know, they talk to capitalism and all that, but they don't understand it. And if they did, they would realize that right now you're not even practicing capitalism. As I said, this is neo-feudalism, but most people they don't understand what that is.
Right.
But you know, you have to look at what's really going on. So that's why I say most people in the manosphere, they're not in business. They don't understand it. They don't understand anything about any of these isms. They don't understand socialism. They don't understand really what capitalism is. They certainly don't understand communism. They don't understand any of this. But if they did, they wouldn't be saying half of the crap that they're saying. I mean, and I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, you're right about that. And they don't realize that you live in a socialist system. You had your public libraries based on socialism. Your social security is based on socialism. All of your publicly available services are based on socialism. I don't even understand how you can even argue against this and say, well, black people should just be capitalist. Capitalist in what way? There's not enough resources to go around. And so you wouldn't have a community unless you had a shared economic platform in the cooperative system. That was the whole purpose of having a public banking system inside North Dakota that's still standing to this very day after almost 150 years or 110 years for that matter. And so people want, to be, a capitalist system, but capitalism has already hit its threshold. And that's why you see the quantitative easing and all of these other system mechanisms going into place to actually ease the burden of the capitalist system, because it's so wrought with corruption. It just doesn't work very well unless it's actually been actually modified. Germany is a socialist state, but you would never hear.
And at the top of the system, where you have the super wealthy, the 1%, they're not practicing capitalism at all.
No,
they are practicing a socialist, or what I would say quasi-communist system that's strictly designed for their benefit, not for yours.
Nagon.
For the feudalist piece of it. That's a big part of it. And a lot of people don't want to look at that.
Nagon.
Yeah.
It's gonna trickle down. Trust me, man. It's gonna trickle down.
Oh, you talking about the trickle down theory?
Rising tide lifts all boats.
Trickle down economics.
Bro, so many white boys just believe in that theory. It's absolutely amazing.
Yeah, how's that working out for the South? Right after the Civil War, they never recovered. So how's that trickle down economics working out for them now? Most of your poverty is coming out of the South. It's not really coming out of the North. You go to places like Mississippi, Arkansas, places look like they've been bum rushed by warfare or something.
Have you guys listened to the audiobook? I think BGS is a clip of it. White Trash, the 400-year history. Yeah. That clip explained a lot, bro.
Yeah.
It's explained a lot.
Yeah, David Monroe says corruption is a human frailty. There is likely more corruption under a socialist system. But how would you know that? You don't live under one. How would you know that? It's amazing that Black people really believe that the system that you have right now is working great for you. Look at the amount of poverty that Black people have. It's not working. If you think it's working, show me examples of this. You may have small pockets here and there, like Baldwin Hills and these places. But that's the exception. It doesn't swallow the rule, though.
But LeBron signed a $1 billion deal with Nike.
Well, that may be true on the individual level, but then they also think that, well, I'm a capitalist, so hit that super chat button, hit that cash app, right? That's how they look at capitalism. I make videos and people pay me, and then that's capitalism. No, that's not. All right, let me jump to the next article. All right, next item on the docket is from RT. Trump's deal of the century is about ignoring Palestinian rights and legitimizing Israel's occupation. Turkish President Erdogan. Expand this out. Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has blasted a plan for resolving the Arab-Israeli conflict presented by Donald Trump, saying the proposal is a blatant attempt to legitimize Israel's occupation of Palestinian territories. Erdogan, a longtime critic of Israeli policies, lashed out at the U.S. proposed roadmap in a Wednesday interview with journalists who were accompanying him on his return from a three-country visit to Africa. This is the plan to ignore Palestinians' rights and legitimize Israel's occupation, Erdogan said, as quoted by an Anadolu agency. The remark is in line with criticisms voiced earlier by other Turkish officials. The foreign ministry branded Trump's plan stillborn and said it was aimed at killing the two-state solution and stealing Palestinian lands. Last September, Erdogan used the floor of the UN General Assembly to denounce the expansion of Israeli control since 1947. He used the favorite tool of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, a big fan of visual props, and showed the international audience a series of maps to illustrate his argument. The proposed deal, which US officials have touted as a pragmatic and realistic approach to the real situation on the ground, envisions a Palestinian state comprising of several enclaves connected by roads and mostly surrounded by Israeli territory. The state would have to subject its security to the policies of the Israeli government. The carrot is the promise of a multi-billion-dollar investment and a promise to freeze construction of Israeli settlements in occupied Palestinian lands for 4 years. Palestinian authorities rejected the term of the deal. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas called the plan a conspiracy and stressed that the Palestinian rights are not for sale. Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu praised it as an opportunity of the century. So Trump doesn't know much about the Middle East, so he didn't write this, to be quite honest and quite frank. And so what's happening here is that Israel wrote this plan themselves, and it probably came from Jared Kushner himself. The thing is that Palestinian territory has been all gobbled up. So it's like a pizza. Everybody got their slice except for the Palestinians, and you're saying, well, there's only one slice left. Here, have that. It's cold too. They eat it cold. Don't heat it up. Just eat it cold. And there's some crust left in the in the box too, if you want that. You can't take all the pizza and then say you're going to divide it up. You already ate all the pieces. What is there to divide? How are you going to have a two-state solution? And why do they need a two-state solution? Right? There's no, there are more, Arabs in that area than what would be the European colonizers. So why would they want an integrated state? They don't want that. An integrated state would mean that from a democratic standpoint, they would be voted out of office every single time, and they know that. They could never handle something like that.
What do you think is the end game for the Israelis?
The end game is that BDS will take place. So boycott, divestment, and sanctions will take place on a massive scale, and they will follow the same fate that South Africa has in the past during the apartheid. And because of that, they have very little leverage with other nation states now. Because if you look at the last UN vote to lift sanctions off of Cuba last year, there was only 2 states that vetoed it: the United States and Israel. Israel sees the writing on the wall that many of these other countries do not actually agree with you. And that in the United States, 26 of the 48 lower states actually have anti-BDS laws on the books now that violate the First Amendment. It's impossible to have a constitution that has been, undermined by a foreign power. At this point, we're being occupied. You're being told that you cannot boycott, divest, and sanction a foreign nation that's an ally to the United States. That's impossible. You can say what you want about Trump. You can say what you want about Obama and his birth certificate and whether or not he's a real American or not. But if you say anything about that state, you're subject to all types of penalties. How is this possible? So I think that Supreme Court will have to overturn. Let me share my screen real quick.
But the Republicans are going to have the Supreme Court for the next 30 years. So the U.S. is going to be okay with this for the foreseeable future.
That you don't have a country then. If someone else can, if another foreign power can come in and undermine your country's constitution, then you don't have a country. You don't have a country.
Damn.
What's the point of having a country if you don't have a constitution, right? So let me share my screen real quick. All right, so here you have, these are the states that support anti-BDS. So basically you cannot say anything about Israel. Let me get a better photo, better map. So the states in red here, see if I can expand this out. What happened? All right. The states that are in red indicate they have passed anti-BDS legislation. So basically, you cannot boycott, divest, or sanction the state of Israel. If you are,
Damn, they got my state. They have my state. Respect. Yeah. Respect.
And so 26 states have signed up for this. If the rest of the states that are in gray are actually this year will come up on the ballot. They would actually put this on the books for the House to actually pass whether or not they can they will push this through anti-BDS policies in their states. Massachusetts is up there, so is Connecticut. And so what's happening here is that these states that signed up have basically punished Americans for criticism over Israel, over a foreign power. You can talk about the Queen and her Majesty over in the UK. You can say what you want about Trump. You can talk about Obama. You can even say the most negative things about Kobe Bryant. Rest in peace to his brother. You say anything about this fictitious state in the Middle East, you're punished. You don't, if the First Amendment is meant to allow Americans to have the right to freedom of expression politically, and you're saying that this no longer is, this is null and void because of this anti-BDS law, then you don't have a constitution. What's the point of the Constitution? Yeah, this is going to be very interesting because I keep track of a lot of the activity that happens in BDS movements, and if you're telling me that people are going to have to accept this, 95% of the 100 million guns are owned by white males. How long do you think you can hold out for? Legally registered guns I'm referring to. How long do you think you're going to hold out for?
In Virginia, they're already having problems with the state government.
Yeah, well, you see, Virginia's not even on the not highlighted either. You see, Delaware is highlighted. You know, good old Joe Biden. Maryland, they've already sold out. Brothers there. New York, they've been sold out. New Jersey sold out. Philly, Pennsylvania is sold out. I don't know how long my state's gonna be able to hold out for. Wisconsin, Michigan, all these blue states. I mean, it's absurd. You don't even have any right to freedom of expression anymore. I mean, they're punishing people. It's ridiculous. I mean, it's bad enough that Black people don't have the ability to really speak out, but now you're telling me they can't even speak out against their brethren over in the Middle East. According to Malcolm X, said that you're not going to be liberated until those Palestinians are liberated over there and in the Middle East. Your brown brothers over there. He said this in the 1960s. He went and visited Palestine twice. Came back and said that the struggle's not over until they're liberated as well. So for all those people who want to tote Malcolm X, tote that. All right, let me jump to the next item on the docket. All right, let me jump to this last one. All right, this last one is from AlJazeera.com. Trump impeachment trial day 9. All the links update. So breeze through this real quick. The impeachment trial of U.S. President Donald Trump entered a new phase on Wednesday as senators were given their first chance to ask questions to both the Democratic House managers prosecuting the case and the defense team working for the president. Both House managers and the president's lawyers presented their arguments for and against removing Trump from office over the last 6 days. Democrats spent most of their allotted 24 hours over 3 days outlining the 2 articles of impeachment on which the House voted to impeach Trump: abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. They argue that failing to remove the president would set a dangerous precedent for future leaders of the country to use their office in a self-serving way. Meanwhile, Trump's defense team, leaving over 10 hours on the timer in much briefer arguments, framed the impeachment as an attempt to undermine U.S. democracy. They also repeatedly returned to the fact that the president had not committed a crime, portraying the grounds for impeachment outlined by Democrats as dangerously subjective. On Wednesday and Thursday, senators who are banned from speaking during the trial will submit written questions to Presiding Officer Chief Justice John Roberts, who will pose them to prosecutions and defense. After the phase of the trial, the proceedings will move into a much anticipated debate over whether more evidence, including subpoenaing witnesses and documents, will be permitted. That debate has grown more fraught in recent days, with reported revelations in a draft book by former National Security Advisor John Bolton, further stoking Democrats' calls for former White House official to testify. As the trial moves into the question and answer portion, here are all the latest updates as of Wednesday, January 29th. Ukraine part of Bolton manuscript should not be classified. Lawyer Bolton and his lawyer do not believe any information in a chapter on Ukraine and Bolton's book manuscript should be considered classified. The lawyer wrote last week in a letter to the White House. Bolton's lawyer, Charles Cooper, released his letter on Wednesday after an earlier letter he had received from the White House became public. In that letter, the White House National Security Council said Bolton's book manuscript appeared to contain significant amounts of classified information and could not be published in its current form. No shit. Trump, game over. Trump tweeted a video of his former national security advisor, John Bolton, describing the calls between Trump and his Ukrainian counterpart as warm and cordial. The only thing he wrote about the video was game over. Bolton has become a central part of the impeachment trial as senators battle over whether he and others should be called as witnesses. I'm not going to read this whole thing because I think we've reached the what we could for Wednesday, but because this is all information leading up to and what has happened. But Bolton, in my opinion, Bolton is a snitch. He's a snitch. He wasn't going to sit trial. He wasn't going to sit as a witness when he was in office. Now that he's not in office, he wants to run his lips. You know, Oakley Dokley, you know, Mr. Ned Flanders himself, and you know, he can never get back into office because he can never be trusted. You would throw your boss under the bus, and for what exactly? You're never going to be president. Who would vote for you? You have no support. Even Lindsey Graham can't get any support to be president. And he dropped out of the race pretty early back in 2016. So what I'm saying here is that no, Bolton's a rat. You know, Trump did not violate or commit any crimes for that matter. You know, abuse of power is not a crime. It's not a criminal offense. And so because of that, he's not all that, you know, he's not, I'm not saying that Trump is a good guy. I'm saying from a factual standpoint, that what they're trying to get him on isn't going to stick. All right, let me look at the chat and see if there's any questions, any contributions I should actually acknowledging. David Monroe says he does not know why Trump stuck his nose in that one. Palestinian conflict is just a mess for both sides and everyone involved. Trump didn't actually stick his nose into anything. The United States has been involved since day one, long before Trump was even thought about in politics. So this doesn't have anything to do with Trump. They're leveraging Trump's position to actually pass a lot of their more colonialist agenda. Trump has very little to do with this. Associated Art says, I think the FBI stopped blacks from creating their own political party. Not necessarily. I mean, the Congressional Black Caucus was supposed to be that in the 90s, but that did not turn out to be anything of fruition. I'm saying today, Black people have the best opportunity to actually create a political organization, a political affairs committee for themselves. And we don't really have that, at least not in our best interest right now. You don't really see Black people organizing politically. They leverage social media for arguing and bickering about swirling and things like that, things that are non-sensical. And so they don't have any sort of political organization right now. However, to your point, and I think this might be relevant, is that Black men are leaving the Democratic Party in droves. You can look at the percentage. You know, Trump got more support during his first campaign, during the initial campaign, than Romney got in 2012 from black men. So black men are leaving the Democratic Party in trickles and drips and drops and stuff like that. And then you factor in the Black Christian church. Black men are leaving Christianity and moving to Islam, or they're going atheist. You see a lot of guys in the manosphere that are openly saying, yeah, I'm an atheist. You see a lot of black men who have joined the Nation of Islam. So you're starting to see the two major institutions of power in the black community being the Christian church, as well as the Democratic Party. Black men are actually leaving them. So when we talk about SYSBM, SYSBM is not just about relationships and whatnot. It's also a political movement as well, or can be seen as a political movement. So we should actually pay attention to these type of things. I think that, just in my personal opinion, I think that this is the right time to actually start politically organizing. You know, if black men can come together for something like a hashtag, I don't see why you can't go for something that's even bigger. I also throw in the interracial component for black men politically that shout out to Kevin Samuels, because Kevin Samuels has been pushing this, that 30% of college educated black men marry out. 1/3 of your men who have some form of post-secondary education are actually marrying out. That's a political move. No, that's not just some a life choice. That's a political move. You're saying something to your I guess your socially constructed community of black people, or ADOS, or FBA, whatever you want to call them now. You're basically saying, you know, this is my line in the sand. And I think black men are starting to draw a lot of lines in the sand now around themselves, you know, one in the front, one on the side, and one in the back. And they're basically saying, these are my political lines. I'm not toting the Democratic message anymore. I'm not toting the Bible anymore. I'm going to Islam. I'm going somewhere else. That black men have, for all intents and purposes, have been trickling or walking gently with this SYSBM thing. So there is a political component, a major political component to SYSBM. That I think that should be actually looked at from a deeper dive, from just talking about it from a high level. All right, let me see if anybody's trying to get on. Nope. All right, let me get out of here, man. Thank you all for joining us, man. Hit the like button if you've not already done so. Share the video if possible. Hit that notification bell so you get all the updates from the Black Brain Trust, including those posted on the community tab. Docket in description beneath the video for you to reference.